All right, everybody, welcome back to College Knowledge. I'm Dave Kozak alongside Joe Kearns. Wanted to talk today about some of the noise that's out there. The college, and really what I would call this is kind of post-pandemic higher education, which if you're in it now, you know that it's gone kind of haywire. There's a lot of different, number one, distractions. Everybody's talking about it, writing about it. You bring college loans into it, it causes more issues than people can imagine. And it really has caused a cloud of just uncertainty in higher education. So one of the biggest issues that I see for kind of the everyday college or budding college student, right, is what's real, what's not real? How does this whole thing play out? And unfortunately, it's not as clear as it used to be, right? It's not cut and dry anymore. So last night I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about today, and I did some Google action, and I went down the rabbit holes of, is college really harder to get into? What's the admission rate? Are students actually prepared for college? Is it worth the investment, right? So just straight Google searches on that stuff. And what I could not believe was the amount of articles contradicting one another on the subject matter of each of those. It's crazy, right? So there were some different kind of looks at it, different angles, but the fact is college enrollments are down, right? That is 100% a fact. They were on a steady decline.
Pre-pandemic,
right? And then the pandemic and the way they dealt with it just kind of crushed the overall enrollments. And so, I was on U.S. News and World Report checking out some of the stuff they were writing, and the statistics are kind of staggering. It was a steady decline, like consistent decline leading up to that. But the undergraduate student body has dropped by nearly 1.4 million students during the pandemic. And this is the 2021 statistics. So you're talking about a 10%, almost nearly a 10% decline. And the expectation was that it was going to tick back up, right? And it has not. And the problem that we're seeing now is it's a continuous downturn, and it's not just the four-year schools. It's the community college. It's everybody. The counterintuitive component that shocked me that I think we should talk about is that it's starting to get harder to get into these schools. So explain that, right? Overall, and because I got a whole subset of articles that are about how it's harder to get into school now. Right. So we have less people going. Right. But it's harder to get in.
So, the first thing that comes to my mind there is this, obviously it's a big number across the board.
Yep.
But what schools, you talk about like an Ivy League level school, are they hurting for enrollments? Are they hurting with their applications?
No, they're at their lowest admittance rate in history.
So, I guess that's like some of these numbers that you're saying.
Yep.
Again, statistics are statistics, but I know that numbers don't lie, but also when you start to dig into some of these, all right, less people are enrolling in college, but is it less people are enrolling at specific colleges? Well, that's what I'm curious about.
And so I got.
I'm sure you might not have the answer.
I got the raw statistics, but then I continued to dig into it, and there's this an article, and I'll find it in a second, but it talks about college enrollment is down, but applications at elite schools are at like an all-time high.
Okay.
Right. So and what the inference was in this, or the assumption in this, was that people are now taking this approach that it's like top tier schools or not. So you're either getting into Harvard or Yale or Princeton or whatever, or you're not going. And that is, to me, insane.
Yeah.
Because it's been well documented and proven that the Harvard degrees and the things, they're not what they used to be from a job placement standpoint, right? Another article here talks about someone one of the jokes in Ivy is they already get smart students. Their job is not to mess them up, right? So and that's a whether it's a stereotype, it is a well documented thought in the Ivy League world. You're getting the best of the best. Your job's not to mess them up, right?
First thing I got it, because that's absolutely crazy to me when you say that, because my God, as an adult now, right? Not for nothing. Once you hit 30, at least I'll say 30.
Yep.
When you say somebody went to an Ivy League institution, it's usually only if you're talking about it in that how not successful that person is.
Right.
When maybe like you graduate like 24, 25, people still talk about it and have this aura about, oh my God, you went to the Ivy League school. At least this is how I gotta look at it, is like, okay, well, 30 and beyond, it's how successful you've been in your business, right? Or what you're doing is for a job. Like, how successful are you? Not necessarily where you went to school. And the only time I hear conversations like, oh my God, he went to Penn, he went to Brown, he went to Yale, is followed up by, and he's unemployed. Like, or it's just not a good, it's odd how I've realized how that's changed over my life. It's like, oh, he's obviously really smart. He went to Penn. But as I get older, it's like, well, does that like kind of like thought of like that view from authority, like does that really, like that goes away as you get older? And for me, that's shocking that it's almost like it's that or nothing. Yeah. It's insane.
Well, and doing what we do every single day, we know that's the worst possible way you could look at it. Like it makes no sense. But so Jeff Selingo wrote a book and is a well-published in the college space, and his book's called Who Gets In and Why. And in this interview style conversation of the article, it was on NPR website. And the kind of reality is that the prestigious names have always had cultural cachet, right? So they always have carried things. But in this moment, it's almost that it's now like an Ivy or bust attitude. And the reality to that thinking, that the toxicity of that thinking is, it's well documented that you graduate in the top of your class from a major institution, state school, whatever. There is virtually no earnings differential between that and an Ivy League education, right? They're and I'll go on and I'll find the spot where it says it, but the value of higher education is almost being placed only at the top. Yeah. And unfortunately, if you're paying attention to what's going on right now, there are polarized, politicized environments in some of those elite schools, and it is ruining that kind of open forum that was higher education, where you're supposed to go and your job is to learn how to learn, right, not learn how to be, stuck in the mud, if you will. So to me, that was a crazy component, because one of the things we've preached for 20 years now is, for a lot of families, if you go down what would be arguably a rung down on the elitism of the school, the money's still there, the education's still there, and it can be well worth your while to make that decision, right? And so this I mean, it's almost a falsehood. It's like it's head trash is what it is.
Well, there's not a guarantee you're going to be successful in life if you go to Ivy Leagues. There's not a guarantee that you're not going to be successful if you go to a state school or a lesser known private school. I mean, it's just that's just not true. It's just not factual, and it's...
Well, and they've been trying to measure the outcome on college for a long time. And the one way, unfortunately, that people judge schools going in is not based on the return over a lifetime of earnings on the outside. What it is the rankings in U.S. News and World Report, or the rankings in Princeton Review and all these things. And so what are these rankings based on? Right? So you're targeting a school that you consider elite because it's ranked in some magazine article for whatever reason, not because of the number one thing that you should be focused on, which is how much money can you possibly make, or what quality of life can you live on the other side of college, right? If your goal is to become a doctor, your goal is to become a lawyer, isn't really then the amount of students that move on to graduate schools and get scholarships at graduate schools really the factor that should matter in the decision-making process on that?
You think.
Right, but it's not.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, a lot of those rankings, it comes down to, well, how hard is it to get in? That is something that, well, do they only accept 6% of their students? Another thing that they talk about is their yield. Well, if a school has to fill 1,000 seats and they only have to accept 1,500 students to fill those, that means it's an elite institution, right? Because it's like almost everybody who's been accepted is going there. Well, these are some things that schools can manipulate, right? Like these are some. So how do you get your rankings to go up higher? Well, we'll be very selective and know that not just the best students, but we're going to do some extra homework to see, well, if we accept you, what's the likelihood you're going to come? You give a higher percentage that, okay, now I can make us look like we are more elite than the other school that has to accept 2,000 students to fill that piece. But then the other thing, because something that I always look at, and not as much the graduation rate, because it's based off of the 6-year number.
Wait until I get into that, because that is, the statistics on graduation rates are insane right now.
But one of the things that I look at that whenever I bring it up to parents, they've never heard of it, is the retention rate. How many freshmen come back sophomore year? Well, if you kind of have this stigma that you get into a private school, and you're there for your first year and you know it might not be the best fit, you're talking about it's like that school or bust, right? So when schools get these high rankings, when they get that elite status, what are the chances that the students are actually going to do what's best for them and go somewhere else? If, mentally it's like, I got in here, if I leave, I'm a failure. Like, I have to stay here. Is it that, or is it that it's that great of an institution? So I always like to look at that retention rate and kind of say, okay, well, how many kids come back? But some of the things you're talking about, that obviously would influence that number. So now, hey, because of how we've gotten this elite status with the rankings, now there's another piece of it that we know kids aren't going to leave, and now it makes us even look better. It's colleges are run like a business, man.
They are run like a business, and if you can't get over that part, right, you're already losing in the college game. If you don't understand, and we talk about what we do for a living, helping families make sound choices on college and finance, and how they come together to affect retirement, all that stuff. Like, if you can't just understand that colleges are run like a business, you're going to lose and make an emotional decision that has a significantly real detrimental outcome, right? And so it's a couple of the quotes that I think are awesome here, right? And this is Jeff Slingo again, and he's quoted as I often say, the job of Harvard is really to take a bunch of the smartest kids in the world every year and make sure they don't ruin the smart kids that they're already getting, right? So start there, and then the next piece that I think is staggering, getting back to the difference in achievement of the Ivy versus others, the idea that elite schools don't actually make high achievers, but just sort of pick them out of the crowd has actually been studied by economists. And so there was one study done by Alan Kruger and a few other folks years ago, and it talked about what happened to students who got into the elite schools and those versus those that ended up going elsewhere, right? Same caliber of student, one going to elite school, one going to school down louder, and they found that the outcomes were remarkably similar. Right? So your elite student, no matter where they go, is going to end up on a pathway to success, right? Not every time, not every person, but there is not this drastic difference, which I think, whether it's politics or media or whatever, it's the noise that we started the show talking about the noise. It's the noise that forces people to make this choice and try and get their student into an elite school that they may have no business being at that elite school, and set the child up for failure, to be disappointed in the fact that they didn't get into that school. And there's another article that I'll cross over to that talks about the idea that the admissions world is upside down right now. They don't know how to admit students. It is crazy, because you take away that SAT and ACT score, and you now have to dig into the curriculum at the school, the amount of APs, to take an AP class is one thing. To get a 5 on an AP test is an entirely different thing.
Yeah.
So can you get an A in an AP class and get a 2 or 3 on the test? Well, how does that pair up? So the admissions people have to now dig in further to try and make a decision. And guess what they don't have? The staff, the time, or the resources to dig in like that. So you're arguably maybe you're a 5-minute or 7-minute conversation in an admissions department if you get the conversation.
Right.
And then it's left subjectively to the individual that's making that call.
Yeah. I've seen over the past couple of years, there have been, I want to say, outliers, but it definitely changed on some students that were accepted at specific schools and students that were rejected. There was a big swing. And it was shocking because it was so different from years past. I think the other piece that sticks out to me as you're saying some of those things is also looking at, well, does everybody have the opportunity to take those AP courses?
Yep.
And now are you limiting who you accept based on, what if somebody doesn't have, goes to a high school that has the same availability of courses as somebody else? It's not any fault of the student, but that might be a phenomenal student, and now they just don't look as good because there's no SAT that takes into plate that kind of standardized. Okay, I can compare two students, and now with those potential changes on the horizon, I think it's not going to make things easier for an admissions department with some of the SAT changes that are going to be upcoming. I think it's only going to get tougher.
So that's a good question, Dave. If the college admissions department is struggling and doesn't know what they're doing, how do kids get guidance? How do guidance counselors try to navigate this if the people that they're trying to impress, they don't know what potential outcomes are? They don't know what the likelihood of being accepted is. They don't know what they're looking for. How do you give the student the right advice at that point?
It's increasingly more difficult, which is why I think, again, what we bring to the table on the admission side is it's the same thing we do on the financial side. Put yourself in the best possible situation at the best strategic position and the best school to try and maximize, right? I'll find the component where it talks about the, right here. All right, so of more than 500 institutions that responded to the initial survey, nearly 80% voiced concern about their ability to be administratively capable in the future, while more than half, 56%, said they're concerned about their ability to adequately serve the students at the current staffing levels. This is on inbound admissions, right? So the enrollment data, basically National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, talks about staffing shortages, right? So you take away a very easy way to measure the quality of a student, and then you short staff the departments that make these decisions, and they don't have a key metric that they used to say yes or no based on, and they have to make the decision to accept these people, right? And then to teach them how to navigate the tuition payments and what are loans and how to go through the whole thing. So the very downside of this is that it becomes increasingly difficult to now say, well, here's the activities you need to show. Here's the essay you need to write. Here's the, how do you make up for the SAT score? And we've had interviews with schools, tons of them, where, they've changed their algorithm. They've put more weight in one area versus another. Well, what if one school puts more weight on the essay and the other school puts more weight on the GPA?
Right.
And you don't know that going into it, right? And then it becomes more subjective of the person who's reviewing it, which is a whole nother crapshoot that you have to deal with, right?
Well, with these staffing shortages and this issue, wouldn't colleges start to charge less?
You would think.
Or is it that more money's going into the marketing to make sure that...
The last decade, 25% increase in overall tuition.
Yeah.
The last 10 years.
Yeah.
Last 20 years, nearly double.
Yeah.
Right? So, and why is that possible, and how can that continue to remain, right? Well, when you look at the enrollment numbers at some of these different institutions, there is an absolute onslaught of applicants, right? And when you remove the SAT and the ACT, what happens? Well, now my GPA is a 4.4.
Right. You probably think you have a better shot of getting in. Right?
Yeah. So those elite schools we're talking about are the ones that are getting overloaded with applicants. And then the question is, if they don't get in, where do they go? Where's the secondary component, right?
Yeah.
And so, again, I think we're in this, a lot of noise out there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that always has been kind of a guide to me is when you go into a courtroom, you don't represent yourself, right? Because only a fool represents himself, right? Well, there's a lot of noise out there about liability and were you injured on the job, and there's all kinds of noise, right? And you attach yourself to a lawyer to go there. When you're earning large incomes and you have, assets and funds and your tax burden is going to be big, who's the first person you turn to?
Your accountant.
Because there's a lot of noise on what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what you can do, what's legal, all of a sudden college becomes another area of extreme noise.
Yeah.
And what do people do? They try and fight this fight on their own.
That's right.
And that is, to me, this is great for our industry. This is great for what we do, right? But people have to be aware of it, right? In these articles that I've done, and there's 12 of them on the, 2, 4, 6, 7, 9 on the screen right now. Of those 9 articles, there's contradictory information in each one.
Yeah.
So you decide you're going to go into this on your own, and you start going down the rabbit hole. One article says this, the next article says that. There's a silver lining, there's no silver lining, the decline is here to stay, the decline is just temporary, it's transient. What? So what is the truth? What is the reality? Well, before we get to the next kind of segment, which is it worth the investment, right? The reality is that the landscape has changed, and it hasn't changed slowly. It has been rapid, and extraordinarily rapid. And since 2000, the rising cost tuition, schools are double what they were in 2000, right? When you have that type of price inflation, the conversation changes. It's no longer just, hey, college is the next step for you. College is what you got to do, because it becomes now a question of affordability.
Yeah.
And then add on top of it all the noise about student debt and student loans and how to do it. Well, my argument to everyone is the $1.7 trillion student debt problem is because people didn't hire the right people to help them out.
Yeah.
Right? There is no reason for that debt to exist the way it does.
Yeah.
But it's people making poor decisions financially, and it's people making poor decisions on the institution they attend.
Without a doubt, it's going into it blind. Right? It's ultimately not knowing how the system works, just thinking that it's you apply, you get in, here's the price, and that's it. And then, you get the bill in the mail and you haven't prepared for how you're going to pay that bill. It's so many families, that's the route they've gone. And that's exactly what you're saying, that they didn't know that there was people out there to actually give them help. I can't tell you how often people say, we didn't know people like you existed. Yep. Right? And the next thing that always comes up after that is, I wish I met you 5 years ago. Right? Because they know they've made the mistakes in the process, and that they wish that they did it sooner. But that honestly is when you talk about, especially, we've done episodes on the PLUS loan. It's because you've gone in blind. Yep. And it's
the only string you can pull.
Or that's the chatter. Well, you see all the student loan debt. How do kids go to school? They borrow. If obviously that's the way people do it. Nobody can afford it, so that's just what we're going to do because that's what everyone else does. So,
yeah, and the loan crisis is a self-indulgent crisis. It's a not taking the subject matter seriously. And I think 30 years ago, college tuition was not the same financial commitment that it is today.
Yeah.
And so when that revolutionizes, so too does the thought behind going and how you go and what you choose, right? I think the other part that becomes tedious for people is think about what we're coaching. We're coaching parents and their student to make a sound decision, both financially and academically, for their desired profession. So you've got to make a lot of really critical choices in a very short period of time at a very young age, with hopefully the guidance of the parents. Well, how many people are first generation college students? There's a lot out there. Well, if that's the case, what advice can the parents bring to the table? Maybe they're good thinkers, maybe they've done their research, but that, again, there's another crapshoot there. So
to add to that, even parents that have gone to college, when you kind of teach them the system, everybody goes, oh my God, this is so different than how it was when I went. It is very different, mainly because of how the prices increase.
So the one thing that I wanted to also kind of throw out there is, like, you'll hear the parent come in, or the chatter in the parent world, which is like, I'm not paying, $80,000 for a journalism degree or a creative writing or something like that. But the college tuition doesn't change. You pay what the price of the school is, regardless of what you're going to graduate with. You can graduate with a $300,000 investment on a career path that will never return that investment. Where you're a $50,000 person or you're an $80,000 job, right? So my question is, why isn't there a better system to determine the cost of the education commensurate with the outcome of the education, right? So you want to be a lawyer, a doctor, and have the potential to earn $1 million a year, charge $800 an hour, you're going to pay for that. But if you want to be a social worker that's going to earn 100, maybe 150 if they're at the top of their career, should you pay the same amount that you pay to become a doctor or a pre-med or go through that? Now, can the college manage that? Now you tell some professor that their life's work is less valuable than the life's work of someone else. Now we get into the equity issues, and we get into all the diversity, equity, inclusion stuff that's going on, which that's its own can of worms, right? So again, I think that's the fair way to do it, but I don't know that the data or statistics will ever be presented in a way that would make that decision possible, right? And would you just kill certain industries by doing that?
Be interesting.
Because even look at the alternative to college, right? You can go to a trade school. There are you can come out of the trades right now and earn 6 figures.
Well, I tell it to everybody, this is my profession, is to guide families through college. But it's also that idea that you have to go. It doesn't exist. You don't have to go. There's certain career paths, but it's not for everybody. The worst thing you can do is start going to college, take out loans, and then not finish.
So let's get into that.
That's the worst thing that can happen. At least, well, maybe you go that you mentioned you have a degree that doesn't get you a job. That could be pretty bad too. But in most cases, it's that you don't finish, you don't have that degree, but you still got the loans that came along with a few years.
And there are some crazy statistics on graduation rates that we'll get into. But so then my next rabbit hole I dove into is college worth it, right? And basically every article has 4 reasons why it is and 4 reasons why it isn't. And so the summary is, bottom line, a lot of jobs require a college degree, right? So there are plenty of jobs you can choose that don't, but college degree opens up doors to career paths that you may not otherwise get, right? College graduates tend to make more money, right? According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the median income for high school graduate is $30,000, while those earning a bachelor's degree make around $52,000, right? As long as you graduate debt-free, the college diploma can help you build wealth a lot quicker. Now the question is, what if you don't graduate debt-free? And what does it do to that, you could build wealth quicker environment? Also, with the college degree, there is upward mobility that is kind of leaps and bounds upward mobility as opposed to standardized pay raises, right? So you can get promoted, you can go further, you can get companies to pay for extra degrees and things like that, right? They talk about the skills you learn inside and outside the classroom, the problem solving, critical thinking, teamwork, organization, structure, all that stuff. So there's obviously skills you can pull out of it. But one of the interesting points to me was, and I don't know, I mean, this article is recent. So this was, let me just see when this was written. This is July 8th, 2022. And this is a Ramsey article written by Ken Coleman. And Ken Coleman is a pretty well-known speaker. But you get access to resources and opportunities, right? So guidance counselors, career centers, job fairs, clubs, volunteers, things that you wouldn't get otherwise to gain experience you'll need to make yourself stand out in the job market. There's another article that also talks about people with college degrees that go into the workforce, higher percentage of them have medical insurance and benefits that, you know, some of those other companies want. Yeah. So there are certainly reasons. What I found interesting was the idea and the reasons they put forth for why it might not be worth it, right? Number one is, does the job you really want, that's a double-headed sphere, because do you know the job you want as you go in? And does the job you want require the degree on the other side, right? So again, back to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York report, it says that 43% of college grads are working in a job that doesn't need a degree.
Okay.
That is a staggering statistic.
Wow.
Now, I can't cite that. That is this is pulling from the article, so I'm trusting it as real because it cites the Federal Reserve Bank of New York report. The unemployment rate of 25 to 34-year-olds who didn't complete their college education is 78%, right? Which isn't too bad, considering the employment rate, not the unemployment rate. The employment rate is 78%. The same group that went to college is 86%. So they're arguing that's pretty close.
8% higher.
8% higher for, employment rate for someone with a college degree. So I look at that as a positive to the college side as opposed to the negative. They're trying to infer and say that there's not that much of a discrepancy there, but I would rather err on the side of 86 than I would on the 78. I think the point that is very valid that everyone needs to consider, and I think this is something that is cultural right now in the U.S., is that just because you get a college degree doesn't mean you're going to land the high-paying job or become one of the 1%. It doesn't work that way, right? Any degree will help you bring home a paycheck, but not all degrees are created equal, right? You can't assume that you're just going to get a $250,000 job because of that. Now, this takes me back to the comment on Harvard, which is their job is to keep smart people and basically
not ruin them.
Not ruin them, right? Just keep them going.
Yeah.
The reality to me is your performance in college and your performance in the workplace will indicate that, right? But just because you have a degree doesn't mean you're hard worker, diligent, and committed to it, right? You can hang out in the middle very easily and just do a role every single day and go about your business, right? The regret component, I think, is another thing to look at, right?
Okay.
So they're talking about this is a pay scale survey, and 66% of those who pursued education beyond high school regretted their degree type, institution, or major, or taking a student loan. That's 2/3 of people regretted the choice they made going into college.
Yes.
If there is not a better statistic to endorse what we do from a college admission standpoint, from a financial standpoint, like I don't know what it is. 66%, 2/3 of the population that graduates college is in some way or another regretting a decision they made along the way.
When we do, speaking engagement, we do workshops. It's typically a question we ask: how many people have a job right now that they studied in college where that their major lines up with?
Yep.
And you see not many hands go up. Right. And a lot of it is not just because of whether they couldn't get a job in that specific field, but most often when you dive into that conversation, it's, I thought I wanted to do this. I entered the workforce. I realized it wasn't for me. Luckily, I have a degree where I could get hired somewhere else and do something else that I was actually enjoy doing.
Yep.
Might have been better to figure it out sooner, right?
Yeah.
Like,
without
yeah,
question.
I mean, just think about when, yeah, you're right. That kind of surprised me that the number's that low, that regret, of saying, I wish I studied something different.
Well, I mean, again, you got to look at,
Well, I guess,
you got to look at, I mean,
how many people actually go even beyond,
correct.
For graduate school, they're lawyers, or I doubt lawyers and doctors are regretting.
Well, like, I got a business degree and economics degree. Mm-hmm. Very happy. Right? Very, like, I understand business, I understand the economy, I can apply it to anything I want to apply it to. People sometimes scoff at a business degree. I go, well, I don't know. It deals with money and sales and marketing and the way the world works. So
we don't need to get into my college journey.
Right?
I made every mistake you can make. And I'm one of those people that I thought I was going to go down a certain career path, and I didn't get good advice. I took everybody at their word. I didn't ask questions, and it led to disaster. It led to money. It led to more time in college. But hey, all things being considered, I'm glad where I'm at today.
Yeah.
I love what I do.
The last point on the downside, I think this is a statistic that we talk about. We throw it out every time we do a presentation. We travel all over the country and give presentations on college and the planning associated, the admissions planning. And people, like, I don't think people take us seriously when we say the graduation rate, like how many people got. I don't think people believe us. I think they think it's a made up number. I don't know why. But the National Center for Education Statistics found that only 63% of college students finish their degree within 6 years.
Wow.
63% within 6 years. It's not the 4-year statistic. They don't even, you can't even find that statistic anymore. But only 63% within 6 years. That means 37% of the people don't graduate within 6 years or don't finish their degree.
I know a couple of years ago that the line that stood out to me was only 1 in 4 students that started college this fall will have their bachelor's degree in 4 years. Only 1 in 4. That's actually saying it's even less than that.
Yeah.
So that's, wow.
It's crazy. And so,
well, that's 6 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
So only 63% graduate in 6 years.
Wow.
Right? So now the point that I'll make there is, okay, so you've done everything right as a family. You're a good income earner, you're both college educated parents, you've planned, you've saved, you've in whatever vehicles, however much you wanted to save, and your child comes out of the pandemic, ill prepared to go to school, which is another article that we'll discuss. Their SAT scores are down. They lost 2 years of their education.
Yep.
They're not ready to go to college, and you plan for 4 really well. So you go pay for 4.
Yep.
They don't graduate in 6, they don't graduate in 7, and they don't graduate at all, but you just dropped how much money?
Yep.
All right? And so the fact that that's not taken more seriously is crazy to me.
Yep.
And, every parent, me included, expects the 4 year.
4 years.
Right?
Yep.
The reality is it's not. It's just not. So again, I think you add all this stuff together and it just validates more and more that people need to seek out professional advice in this arena, because it is not simply admissions or launch or career-based. It's all of that. Plus it's financial, it's retirement, it's everything. And if you don't understand the nuance of the system and how it works, right, you're going to go down a bad pathway and it could cost you a substantial amount of money. So let me dig in. There's another part that I wanted to hit here. Let's talk about the reasons. This is another article on is it worth it? Everybody says college graduates earn more than non-graduates. The majority of jobs require college education. So this is pretty cool to think about, right? In past generations, a college education wasn't necessary to earn middle-class income, according to a Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce study. 2/3 of jobs required a high school diploma or less before 1980, right? So that's no longer the case. Georgetown University predicts that 70% of all jobs will require some college education by 2027. Without higher education on your resume, it may be more difficult to find high-paying jobs, and competition for available opportunities will be fierce, right? So again, you go back to it's a different world than it was.
Yeah.
Different world than people's parents went into. It's just a different world. The apprenticeships and the things like that, and just being credentialed by experience no longer exists. You need the experience and the degree, right? This is the one I want to talk about. So college graduates are more likely to have health insurance, which is interesting because skyrocketing healthcare costs and having quality health insurance is essential for well-being. However, purchasing health insurance on your own can be prohibitively expensive. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, the benchmark premium for a single person policy purchased through a health insurance marketplace is $5,500 a year. So what does that have to do with college? What people don't realize is there's a significant correlation between college education and healthcare coverage.
Okay.
College graduates are far more likely than high school graduates to have employer-provided coverage, offsetting their healthcare costs. The College Board found that 64% of workers with bachelor's degree and 70% of workers with advanced degrees had employer-provided health coverage, while employer plans covered just 50% of high school graduates, right?
Yeah.
So that is a very interesting statistic to me that, you're 14% more likely to have health insurance if you get a college degree from your employer. Right?
And I don't know if that gets into full-time, part-time.
It could.
Right. Is that number, what's the likelihood of having a full-time job with a degree versus, is it the high school diploma can get you income, but it's not full-time. And then you start to think about other things where it's not just like a health benefit, but if you're part-time, do you get a 401k match? Do you get, other pieces of your financial world that need to be addressed? So that's interesting. And I'm going to go to the reasons they say it's not worth it. And this was a Forbes article written June 2022. So again, recent article. I did Forbes, we got NPR, we've got all these recent articles from different arenas. But the number one reason they talk about college is not worth it, you'll likely graduate with student loan debt. Now, tell me, is there anyone in the world that doesn't know about the student loan debt crisis? No, I think everybody.
So it is a very public topic.
Yeah.
And so you throw that up as the number one reason to not go. It's already been politicized. It's already been a polar subject. It's already been exercised. The noise is loud. It's louder than any other noise out there. And you're going to graduate with debt. And so,
well, I read that, and my question to whoever wrote this would simply be, okay, is your advice for people to not buy a house because you'll have a mortgage?
Right?
Like, what? No.
Bingo.
Like, what?
That's my whole point.
That makes.
But we've said it's so bad, it's such a crisis, it's so bad, it's such a crisis that people are like, whoa, I'm not getting involved in that crisis, and they just peel off of it. So, and here's some statistics on it, right? According to the Institute for College Access and Success, 62% of 2019 graduates left school with student loan debt, an average of balance of $28,000.
Okay.
Right?
And?
So it's a car payment.
Yeah, I mean, that's it.
For your education.
I look at that, and believe it or not, I actually think that number's surprising.
Agreed. I would have thought it'd been a lot higher.
Right. Not the debt number, not the 28,000. That's 62%.
Yeah.
Because, and if you're not aware of the system, that student loan debt, 27,000 essentially is offered to every student.
Yep.
So that's 100% of students. Some schools don't offer it, but it's a Stafford loan that's offered by the government. So to say that only 62% of students have debt with an average of 28,000, well, then you're telling me that there's a lot of people that aren't even taking the money that the government offers at a low interest rate in the student's name. And guess what? If you're talking about since 2019, interest rates are really low. if you're somebody that paid that extra money, think about what the market was like 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Well, rather than give that $5,500, $6,500, $7,500 a year to the school, would that money have grown more than that $27,000 with a little bit of interest, and you actually would have been more your net worth would have been higher should you have taken the government's loans? And now, I'm not going to get into the forgiveness piece, but hey, I look at that and I go, how in the world is that a...
Yeah, but what they don't tell you in this, Joe, is the reality that we know.
Yeah.
Right? That is student loan debt, and students can only borrow a certain amount in their name. So that's not accounting for the trillions of dollars that is education-based loans that are out there. Right. And so if the student can't take more and the student doesn't take on more, who does? And how does that affect the parents, the retirement, and all that? Because it's the parents, it's the co-signer, it's the other person that takes the burden of that debt.
I have so many questions. One about that statistic.
Right.
Because again, when I look at that, for me, that's going, okay, so what the average cost of school is what? Mm-hmm. And a student graduates with less than $30,000 in debt, but makes how much more a year? So isn't that a positive, like a reason, like that? It almost sounds like it's backwards. That should be a reason that you're kind of saying, well, hey, if you plan right and you manage your debt and your student graduates with $27,000, that they have skin in the game. For families I work with, that's mission accomplished. Like you said, it's the car payment, and now you got a good return on your investment. You got health insurance, you got the higher pay, I just read that and I go, I get so confused with how they're trying to tout that as a negative. Just knowing how the system, at least that number, how they're quoting it, right? I'm sure that doesn't get into what parents borrowed.
Nope.
Right. So you're just talking to students. Well, the only loan students can get, if that's what that's touting, it's just not a good.
No, it's not. All right, so moving on, Joe, on the same subject.
Yeah.
So we talked about first of all, the statistic they're using to validate that is rubbish because it doesn't go into the rest of the environment.
So many questions.
Because 28,000 doesn't turn into 1.7 or $2 trillion problem, right? And then they go on in this to talk about the student loan repayment plan could take you 10 to 30 years to pay it off if you're paying your minimum monthly payments. You feel the pressure to put other financial goals on hold, which that I think is a more staggering issue, right? And I want to bring market into this too, because right now you have all these graduates with all this debt, graduating college, going into a job market in a down market where unemployment is low, right? And do you know what happens when people's portfolios, top level executives, middle managers, VPs, director level people, when their portfolio drops out and they're 58 years old or they're 62 years old, do you know what they do? They hold on to that job for as long as they can to try and ride it back up. And so the moment that you have middle to upper management staying in position, you have limited upward mobility on the company. That limited upward mobility creates a lack of entry-level jobs, which creates a very difficult market for graduates to get into, right? So you put all that together, and it's a dangerous situation.
Yeah.
The last point that I wanted to make, and I like this, the Forbes approach to the graduation thing better than I like the approach on the other one, because I think the other one was trying to stay current. So there's some speculation to it. This one is completely retroactive.
Okay.
Because the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center found that 58% of students who enrolled in college in 2012 earned a degree within 6 years. Right. So it's a lesser number, and this is completed because the rest of the students were either still in college during that report or dropped out. Right? So that's an even lesser number of people graduating within the 6-year mark than the other report. And so, but this one is completed because it starts in 2012. So your 6-year mark would be 2018, which we have all the statistics from 2018.
Yeah.
Right? Confirmed at this point.
And that's pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Talk about a little scary.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah.
So, and they go on to talk about community college and the expense and the different jobs. But I think the big thing that stuck out to me is that, if you're going into a major that is going to earn you, $50,000 to $100,000 at its peak of its market, then you have to be careful about what you're willing to spend on that education.
Absolutely.
And the debt you would take to it, right? I think the other side is there are some higher paying jobs that don't require the 4-year degree that don't. And so, but you wouldn't know those jobs unless you started the research and you started to go through those conversations and have those tough conversations. Reality is our students aren't prepared to have that conversation when they're asked to have that conversation, and too many parents are ignorant to the subject matter of college acceptance and the way it works. So I think there's it's coming from all sides, and it's a tough spot. Obviously I found this entrepreneurship thing to be interesting. At the end of this article in Forbes, they talk about if you have an idea for a business, an entrepreneur, you could start that business. The average entrepreneur, be your own boss, set your salary. The average earnings for that person is $43,000, which if you go to the electrician, the plumber, the carpenter, the mechanic coming out of a trade school, you're at 56, 55, 48, and 42 respectively. So, and then when you go to the technical degrees or the 2-year degrees, you could talk about, radiation therapist at 80,000, computer programmer at 80,000. So your target has to be set, but who really knows they want to be a dental hygienist when they're 17 years old?
Right.
I think that's a tough thing to come to terms with.
And so, and again, I don't know if it talks about this in any of these articles, but you can show some of these numbers in these average salaries. But I also think that comes along with that is the ability to move up. Like if you're a registered nurse or is there the ability to double your salary like in 10 years? Is the ability to be somewhere where you potentially get some promotions? I mean, God, I always knew that, my mom always used to say my grandfather, he worked at DuPont for his entire life and he never got promoted because he didn't have his degree. Now this is years and years ago, but is that kind of hold you back as well? Not that there's, again, college isn't for everybody, but I was curious if did you read anything on that? Was there any statistics on the ability to move up into a company or be considered for management positions, promotions with a degree versus without, or with a degree versus a 2-year program? I was just curious if you read anything on that front, because that would be some questions I would ask somebody that would do research like this.
And I think that's the research that's lacking.
Yeah,
that's the real piece that we don't have the information on. And so if you don't know that information and you can't guarantee that, and you got to make the decision with the information you have at your fingertips, right?
Potentially at 17 years old.
Yeah, right? At 17 years old with an underdeveloped brain.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of end it here, but I want to talk about, there's a lot of questions we always get, like the college bubble's got to burst. It's not a bubble, right? It's a supply and demand situation, and people are still applying, they're still going, right?
Yeah.
So why have college costs gone up the way they've gone, right? So it's a demand. So the demand for the degrees has increased at the professional level. Jobs requiring a bachelor's degree for employment, that the services that schools offer and the staff requirements to administer those services have increased. So they've just inflated the college's operating budget, right? There's also been money pulled back from different schools, which have forced that expense to be passed on to the end user. So when you take away some of the funding, some of the public institutions that have gotten state and local government funding, and you remove that money, it has to be made up somewhere, right? Yeah. Because colleges are what?
They're
a business.
They're businesses.
Right? And so if it's run like a business, that gets passed down. So, what's the solution? The solution is be strategic, be thoughtful, take this very seriously, take it more seriously than you would most other expenses in your life, because it's going to have a lasting impact. And it's not just going to have a lasting impact on one generation.
Right.
It's a multi-generation impact.
And that hits, home for me, because when I'm successful in guiding a family and we get through the process and now their kids aren't graduating with debt. When a mom looks at me and says, thank God that he doesn't have to pay this debt off for the next 20 years and not start a family, not get married, not buy a house, because that's what I had to do. The fact that we were able to work this out and figure out the best path and fund it and save it, and it didn't hurt our retirement in the process, you nip it in the bud, right? Because now when you think about that,
it's the same. It will snowball, right? You take students now that if they don't figure this out and they graduate with $50,000 in debt, and now they have a job coming out of college that is $50,000 a year. Well, how soon can they start having kids? How soon can they start their adult life, get married? But then if they're paying off the debt, what's the reality? They're going to be able to save for their own kids' college.
Yep.
Right? And 18 years later, 20 years later, what's the cost of college going to be? What is that generation going to be graduate? You can nip it in the bud, and now you can say, hey, we can do this for our child so that our grandkids, we can get this ball rolling in the right direction. And that, when those conversations happen, when I see that happen, it's talk about gratification.
Well, yeah, and that's just it. I talk about my whole story of getting in the financial services industry and just not wanting to be there. It's shark-infested waters. Everybody's trying to rip everybody else off, and it's just, dog-eat-dog world. And you were never having a major impact. Like, this is major impact stuff.
Yeah.
You're helping the parents slip into retirement. You're helping the student launch the right way, and you're helping the generation after that, right? And I'll leave the last thought here. One point that I completely agree with in this Forbes article is choosing the major is one of the biggest decisions you'll make as a student. And if you're not focusing on that and you're not exercising that and thinking about that and exploring what jobs are like and what that stuff is, you're missing the boat on this thing. So
yeah,
great conversation.
This was fun today.
A lot of meat in there, but pay attention to it. The noise is out there. Find someone who knows what they're talking about before you go down this pathway, because it can be very expensive, and ultimately it can set a lot of things off track.
The last piece I want to add to just what you just said, though, is when you find somebody that can help you with this, you're hearing things like finding the major and avoiding student loans and the high cost. Those two worlds have to mesh.
Yep.
You can't, whether it's you hire two different professionals to help you out with each of those individuals, you work with somebody like us that accomplishes both of those pieces.
Yep.
You can't focus on one without the other. You will fail in this game if you only focus on one.
100%.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week.